so pumped. All right, hello everyone on the camera and Jin, who's very kindly come to help me out with this. So the goal of today is to do essay writing, and specifically advanced essay writing for undergrads, so third and fourth year. And the primary method I'm going to use is demystification. So I'm hoping to demystify this whole process of essay writing and try to make a lot of the skills that go into it a bit more manageable. So the research essay in literature is in fact easier to teach, I think, than basic essays, because basic essays in the first and second year and at high school are teaching us particular skills that one day we're going to build together using a lot of those skills into a longer essay. So where a professor in a first year might ask you to do a kind of essay that's a bit unusual and that other professors might not ask you to do, that's probably because they want you to learn a specific skill like close analysis or structure or something like that. But the research essay is a lot closer to a journal article, which is great because if you write a paper that you're happy with, you can submit it to an undergrad journal or even a full-on journal, or you can turn it to a conference paper, something like that. So the other thing to say about this is that it's a mistake to think that just because literary analysis is subjective and qualitative, that it's not rigorous. Some people seem to think that quantitative analysis is the only kind of analysis that's rigorous. Qualitative analysis is still evidence-based. It's just analysis of subjectively taken evidence rather than evidence that's objective. So that means there are standards. There are standards of how these essays are supposed to be done. And really the best way to describe it is these research essays are supposed to be like mini journal articles for peer-reviewed journals. So anyone who tells you that there aren't standards for how this is done is wrong. And I'm going to articulate some of those standards over the next few lectures. The first thing to say about why a lot of people that do research essays are unsuccessful is it's not their fault, it's because they misunderstand the process of what they're supposed to be doing. And by way of illustrating this, I'm going to talk about the research essay as made up of 4 key components. And they're not of totally equal importance, but they're pretty equal in terms of their importance. So, numero 1, 2, 3, 4. The problem most people have is when they write a research essay, they pretty much only do 3. They don't do 4 most of the time. They almost certainly don't do 2, and they don't do most of 1. So 3 is actually writing the draft of the essay. Can't spell. So, this is when you've written an essay the night before and handed it in without any editing, which is stage 4. You've only done section 3 when you should have done all 4. So number 4 is editing. But then there's sections 1 and 2. So the first stage is what I like to refer to as aggregating your evidence. And that's just a fancy way of saying getting the evidence, but I say aggregating because it has more of a sense of kind of getting your evidence, but you're sort of arranging it at the same time. I'll talk about why that's important in a little bit. And then stage 2 is a part that's often mixed in with stage 3, but I like to break it out and talk about it by itself because it's really important, and that's when you, the critic, start to arrange the evidence. So this is the sort of planning phase. So there you go, 4 stages. Aggregating evidence refers to, in a literature essay, what possible things could you talk about? So the way a lot of people do essays is, let's say you've been given a list of questions. People will say, oh, I want to do the question on feminism in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. And then they go through the book looking for evidence they could use to talk about feminism. This isn't totally disastrous, but it's kind of rubbish, because what if that's a bad argument to make in terms of producing an essay that is interesting and helps us talk about the text better? You might have imposed your idea of what the text is about on the text, when really what we're looking for is evidence to build an argument up from, right? So this is sometimes referred to as text up. You want to build an argument from text up, rather than just generating a theory in your head about what the text is about and then like imposing it. So we want to do text up. And in order to do that successfully, we need to try and take ourselves out of the equation as much as possible. So that means you have to sort of try and work out as objectively as possible what the text finds important, right? Not what you think is important about the text, that comes later. But you have to have a good, holistic, general sense of pretty much all the different themes and ideas in the text, right? Then you can start to say, oh, okay, of these things that the text is talking about, now I'm going to do a feminist reading. But you don't just want to jump straight into a reading without a more thorough approach to the evidence, because then you see what you want to see when you reread the book, right? Or when you reread your notes. So we want to try and get past, as much as possible, this way in which a lot, probably most humans, see what they want to see in evidence. Then once you've aggregated your evidence, you're going to arrange the evidence in a sort of planning phase, and that's when you start to make your ideas about the text and the text's ideas about the text interact, and that's how you start to generate material that you can actually write about. And that's when you write the draft, and then once you've written the draft, you have to edit it. If you don't leave yourself enough time to edit, you could be leaving 10, 15, even 20% on the table, like the difference between a C and an A minus, say. So time management is something I'm not going to really talk about here, but it is important. You know, when you, let's say you have, I don't know, you're lucky. Let's say you're lucky and you've got 2 weeks to write this without too much else interfering. You've got to break up those 2 weeks and give yourself time to do all of these. And, you know, don't be over ambitious. Take the amount of time you think you have, reduce it by 25%, and then break it up. All right, so the goal today is mostly to talk about sections 1 and 2, and we'll do items 3 and 4 over the next 2 lectures. So let's get rid of this. So here we go, aggregating the evidence. What is this process about? So Anthony Hopkins once said that having a good script is like being held in the palm of someone's hand, nice and comfortably, you're all warm and cozy and you can just do your thing. And having a bad script is like being stuck in quicksand and you can't get out and you're sinking. And for me, writing an essay is very similar to that, except instead of the script, that first item that's so important for Anthony Hopkins, for us, is getting the right sort of evidence from the text. I'm going to make a statement that's potentially a little controversial for literary scholars now, but I think by the time you come and sit in front of your computer and start to write the essay, most of your success is predetermined by that point. And this stage of discovering evidence and starting to arrange it is one of the ways that's going to make or break your essay. Because if you don't have the right evidence, it doesn't matter how smart you are or how skilled you are as a writer, your essay is going to be a failure. So this is a really important stage. I'm going to spend quite a long time on it as a result. So what we have to do in order to discuss this is to understand what the research essay is trying to do, because that will help us understand the skill of selecting evidence. Make no mistake about it, it is a skill. This isn't a natural talent that's inborn, this is something you can learn, but you have to practice it. But in order to practice it, you have to identify it as a skill in and of itself. So this is one of those unique skills I was talking about earlier that builds together in the final research essay to produce something successful. All right, so what is the goal of the research essay? I wish to. Okay, goals. The goal of the research essay is for us to understand the text better. That's all it's for. The reason it's called the research essay is hopefully it's going to involve some secondary work by the writer, either in literary criticism, so you're going to go and work out how your ideas fit into the wider conversation other people have been having about the text, and you're also going to, maybe someone's here. Yeah, right. Morgan's here.
Oh.
Hey. Welcome, Morgan.
Hi.
Go and take a seat, thanks for coming. So our celebrity entrant Morgan is now here. We're on camera, so I'm just going to roll with this.
Yeah.
All right, so the goal of the research essay is just to understand the text better. That's all it's for. And when you're being assessed by a professor, the research essay has a couple of sort of sub-goals attached to this idea. The first is, hopefully the research essay is going to force you to understand the text better, right? You might think you understand the text before you start to write an essay on it. You might think you have some good ideas about it, but obviously we've all had this experience. When you actually start to write the essay, you realise that your ideas are terrible and you need to start again. So the essay exists for that purpose, at least in part, is just to hold the student accountable to, develop her ideas in a more sort of robust fashion. The secondary goal is to demonstrate to your professor that understanding, right? And so in order to demonstrate that understanding, you need to hit a few sub-goals. So let's put this here. So in order to demonstrate your understanding, you have to, let's for the sake of argument say you're going to write a novel. So I'm going to talk about Huxley's Brave New World a lot today because that's on the course. So let's say you're doing Brave New World. One of the key things you have to be able to do is two things at once. Reach below the surface of the text, so what's going on under the surface. Sometimes this is called the subtext, right? I know this is a relative term, but I'll get to that. Number one, subtext. But number two, you also have to cover enough of the novel that you can actually reasonably claim to be talking about the novel rather than some tiny fragments of it. And these can sometimes pull in opposite directions. In order to understand what's going on beneath the surface of the novel, to elucidate the subtext of the novel, you have to go in depth into maybe just a handful, maybe even one major theme or concept. But in order to understand the breadth of the novel, well, I guess I should say to demonstrate your understanding of the breadth of the novel, you have to talk about enough moments from the novel so that you're doing the novel rather than a short section. These can seem incompatible, but they're not, so long as you understand how to do it. All right, so those are the two main goals understand the text better, that's the goal of the research paper, and demonstrate your understanding to the professor. And here's how you're going to do that. You're going to talk about subtext, and you're going to talk about breadth, kind of at the same time. And how to do that I'll get to in a bit. But remember, we are talking about the research essay. And that's different from a standard essay because you're expected to research the context of the novel you're talking about, or the texts that you're talking about. So there are two ways in which we're frequently going to do this in modern and contemporary literature, and that is criticism and theory. So how do your ideas about the text fit into the wider conversation? And that's where what have other people said about the text comes in. And theory is exactly the same, but instead of you using theory to talk about what other people have said about the text, you're going to use theory to talk about what other people have said about the key ideas that you're talking about. Okay? So this is the same, what other people have said about the key ideas that you're talking about. So let me give an example. Let's say you're talking about Brave New World as an allegory for communism. If you were going to do that, you would say, have other critics said it's an allegory for communism, or am I just talking out of my what's it? But with the theory, you use the theory to talk about what communism is. And if you've got other key ideas, socialism, Marxism, you'll use theory to talk about those things as well. Okay, so this is a very brief overview of what the research essay does, so now we can talk about how you aggregate your evidence, stage one. The short answer is throw your ego away. We can retrieve it in stage two when we arrange the evidence a bit more aggressively and start to plan our own paper. But for the time being, you need to throw yourself into the dustbin and try to just look at what the text actually says. Get rid of your ego. This is obviously an impossible task, but it's a good thing to think about. So what we're going to do is talk about the text as an arrangement of evidence. And what we've got to do is try to understand the maximum possible about the breadth of evidence available to us in the text. We can't do this if we are rereading the text or rereading our notes with an idea of what the text is about already. I mean,